Okay, so let's go back to 1882. There's this one author who saw a huge spiritual war happening, but not up in the heavens. No, he saw it right here on Earth in the healing practices of his time. His big idea? That for every real, genuine act of faith, there was a super powerful counterfeit out there, made just to deceive people. So today, we're going to dig into his really provocative argument, which is that the rise of all this fakery is actually the best proof that the real thing is out there. All right, so to really get inside his head, we're going to follow his argument in 5 key steps. We'll start with his main idea, this whole genuine versus the counterfeit thing. Then we'll unpack the sneaky strategy he thought was going on. We'll also get into why he called the church back then asleep, and check out the one case study he used as his big "I told you so" proof. And then we'll wrap it all up with his final, pretty intense challenge. Okay, so the core of this entire argument from the author, A.J. Gordon, really boils down to one single powerful idea. Think of it like a cosmic tug of war. On one side, you've got genuine divine power, and on the other, a really clever, really dangerous counterfeit that's designed to look exactly like the real thing. And he starts with a metaphor that's actually surprisingly optimistic. He talks about a counterfeit coin. For Gordon, finding a fake coin doesn't just make you wonder if a real one exists. Nope, he says it proves it. So he argued that seeing all of this counterfeit healing pop up shouldn't make people despair. Instead, he saw it as a giant signpost, basically pointing everyone toward the genuine article. So you might be asking, what exactly is this devil's coin he's talking about? Well, Gordon actually came up with a name for it: Satanic Empiricism, and he used that term to talk about the really popular spiritualists and trance doctors of his day. He was convinced they were just performing a direct and very deceptive imitation of God's real healing power. And check this out. This is a little detail Gordon tucks away in a footnote, but it's fascinating. He points out that the original Greek word in the New Testament for sorcery is pharmakia, which, is the root of our modern word pharmacy. He draws a direct line from that ancient word to what he called the legion of medicine men in his time. For him, that shared root was no coincidence. It was, pretty grim. So here, you can kind of see the two sides of that coin laid out, side by side. On the left, you've got the counterfeits Gordon was talking about, the spiritualists, the trance doctors, the medicine men. And on the right, what he saw as the genuine article: divine healing, the power of prayer. This clash, this opposition, this is the engine that drives his entire argument. All right, so this all leads to a really crucial question. I mean, if these counterfeits are out there, what's the point? What's their purpose? Gordon was convinced this wasn't just some random imitation. He believed it was all part of a very deliberate, very calculated strategy of deception. So the big question is, why? What's the ultimate goal here? Why go to all the trouble of creating such an elaborate fake? Well, according to Gordon, it's all about the end game. He actually breaks it down into a 3-step strategy. Step 1, caricature. You copy and distort God's work to make it look kind of ridiculous and bring it into contempt. Step 2, frighten. You use these weird, sometimes scary counterfeits to scare the church away from using its own genuine power. And step 3, establish. You use these fake miracles to set up a whole rival belief system, to win people over. And this all brings Gordon to a pretty radical conclusion. He says the church absolutely should not retreat. In fact, just the opposite. It should see the enemy's actions, sowing weeds in the wheat field, as the ultimate proof that their wheat is the real deal. In his own words, it's the adversary's testimony to the genuineness of the wheat. But, Gordon argued, this fear of the counterfeit had already led to a really tragic outcome. What was it? A church that had been basically lulled into a deep, dangerous sleep, completely unaware that it wasn't really doing anything. And the author paints this really powerful picture here. He says, the enemy isn't some roaring lion when the church is asleep. No, he's quiet. He walks softly, carefully, so he doesn't make any sudden moves that might accidentally wake it up from its comfy slumber. And to really hammer this point home, he pulls a quote from another writer, Erskine. The idea is that the adversary's greatest weapon isn't some big, direct attack on faith. It's way more subtle than that. It's just keeping the church asleep, totally unaware of the power it has, just sitting there, dormant. He argues that a church that's just unconscious basically does the enemy's work for him. But look, Gordon doesn't just stay in the world of theory. To show what he thinks is possible when a church is actually awake, he gives us a real-world case study.
And for him, this is the ultimate proof.
So let's meet Dorothea Trudel. She was a woman in a small Swiss village who ran a home for invalids, for the sick. And her story, for Gordon, was a living, breathing example of that genuine coin he was talking about all along. So Trudel tells this story about the moment that changed everything for her. 4 of her workers got seriously, gravely ill. Medicine wasn't working, so she turned to prayer and the laying on of hands. And what happened? She says all 4 of them recovered. For Trudel, this wasn't just some miracle. It was a huge, shocking wake-up call, an awakening to a divine principle she suddenly realized she'd been totally ignoring. And her approach, wow, it was radically simple, but also incredibly intense spiritually. I mean, she completely rejected all conventional medicine. Her only medicines were the Bible and prayer. Her focus was always on healing the soul first, to bring a person to faith. She demanded absolute dedication from her helpers, and from the sick, a total surrendering faith. Okay, so you take all of this, the idea of the counterfeit, the enemy strategy, the sleeping church, and this powerful example of faith, and it all builds up to Gordon's final, really passionate conclusion. Which, of course, brings us to the final question. When you're facing a rising counterfeit and a sleeping church, what's the solution? What's Gordon's answer? What's his big call to action? Well, his answer is not subtle. It's a thunderous, totally unambiguous command. It's a direct challenge for the church to wake up, to put on its strength, and to rediscover what he calls a forgotten truth about the power of faith, a power he believed had been left dormant for way, way too long. And that really leaves us with a provocative question, one that goes way beyond this one text from the 19th century. Whether you agree with Gordon's specific points or not, his argument kind of forces you to think about a much bigger idea. What happens to any group, any community, any movement when a core idea it was built on just becomes a forgotten truth?